Welcome if you dare. You've stepped into a world where shadows whisper, where every creak in the floor holds a secret. And tonight, you're about to hear a story that will haunt your dreams. Before we begin, make sure you're not alone, or you're ready to uncover what really happened in today's story. Don't forget to subscribe if you're brave enough, because what lurks in this channel is far more terrifying. Let's begin.
The scream in the nighted was a dark and stormy night, and Grandma Rose was sitting alone in her cozy little house on the outskirts of town. She had just finished watching her favorite TV show and was about to head to bed when she heard a blood-curdling scream pierce the night air. The scream was so loud and so chilling that it sent shivers down her spine. At first, Grandma Rose thought it might be just the wind or some animal outside, but as she listened more closely, she realized that the scream sounded almost human. She felt a sense of unease creeping over her, and her mind began to wander to all the terrible things that could be happening outside. Despite her initial fear, Grandma Rose's curiosity got the better of her. She decided to investigate the source of the scream, hoping that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. She grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the darkness. The stormy night air hit her like a slap in the face, and the wind howled around her as she made her way across the yard. The scream seemed to be coming from somewhere nearby, but she couldn't quite pinpoint the location. She shone her flashlight around, trying to see if she could spot anything out of the ordinary. As she walked further away from her house, the scream grew louder, and she began to feel a sense of dread. She called out into the darkness, "Hello, is anyone there?" But there was no response. The only sound was the scream, echoing through the night air. Grandma Rose continued her search, her heart pounding in her chest. She checked the shed, the garden, and even under the porch, but there was no sign of anything unusual. The scream seemed to be coming from all around her, and she was starting to feel like she was losing her mind. Just as she was about to give up, she heard the scream again, this time louder and closer. She spun around, shining her flashlight in all directions, but there was nothing to see. Suddenly, the wind died down, and an eerie silence fell over the yard. Grandma Rose stood frozen, her ears straining to hear any sound. And then she heard it, a faint whispering in her ear. "Find me." The voice was soft and raspy, and it sent chills down her spine. She spun around, trying to see who was speaking to her, but there was no one there. The whisper seemed to be coming from all around her, echoing off the trees. "Find me," it whispered. Again, Grandma Rose's heart was racing now, and she knew she had to get back inside. She turned to run back to her house, but as she did, she heard the scream again, louder and more piercing than before. This time, it seemed to be coming from right behind her, and then everything went black. When Grandma Rose came to, she was lying on the ground, her head throbbing with pain. She slowly sat up, looking around in confusion. The storm had passed, and the night was quiet once again. But as she stood up and brushed herself off, she heard the whisper again. "Find me." This time, she knew she had to investigate further. She stumbled back to her house, her mind racing with questions. Who or what was behind the scream, and what did they want from her? She locked the doors and windows, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that lingered. But as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The scream still echoed in her mind, and she knew that she would never forget this night. And then, just as she was drifting off to sleep, she heard it again. The scream, louder, closer. This time, it was right outside her bedroom window. The window rattled and shook, and Grandma Rose felt a chill run down her spine. She knew she had to do something, but she didn't know what. She tried to call the police, but her phone was dead. She tried to call out for help, but her voice was hoarse and barely audible. She was trapped, and she knew it. The scream grew louder and louder, and Grandma Rose felt like she was going to lose her mind. She covered her ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The scream seemed to be coming from inside her head. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the scream stopped. The silence was deafening, and Grandma Rose felt like she was holding her breath. She waited and waited, but there was no sound. She slowly got out of bed and approached the window. She looked out into the darkness, but there was nothing to see. The night was quiet and still, and Grandma Rose felt a sense of relief wash over her. But as she turned to go back to bed, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. On the windowsill, there was a small piece of paper with a message scrawled on it in red ink. "I'm still here." Grandma Rose's heart sank, and she felt a wave of fear wash over her. Who could have written this? And how did they get into her house? She tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling herself it was just a prank, but deep down, she knew it was something more. She spent the rest of the night in a state of high alert, her senses on edge, waiting for the next sound or movement. But the night passed quietly, and the sun began to rise as the day went on. Grandma Rose tried to go about her routine, but she couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. She kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. She tried to call her friends and family, but no one answered. She felt isolated and alone, trapped in her own home. As the night approached, Grandma Rose's anxiety grew. She knew the scream would come again, and she didn't know how she would cope. She barricaded herself in her bedroom, trying to feel safe, but she knew it was futile. The scream came again, louder and more piercing than before. Grandma Rose covered her ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The scream seemed to be coming from all around her, echoing off the walls. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the scream stopped. The silence was oppressive, and Grandma Rose felt like she was suffocating. She waited and waited, but there was no sound. As the night wore on, Grandma Rose's fear turned to despair. She knew she couldn't take much more of this. She was trapped in a living nightmare, and she didn't know how to escape. And then, just as she was starting to drift off to sleep, she heard a faint whispering in her ear. "Find me." The voice was soft and raspy, and it sent chills down her spine. Grandma Rose's heart was racing now, and she knew she had to get out of there. She grabbed her bag and ran out of the house, not stopping until she was blocks away. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had to get away from the house and the scream. She ran and ran, her heart pounding in her chest, until she reached the police station. She burst through the doors, gasping for breath, and told the officer at the desk what had been happening. The officer listened, his expression skeptical, but Grandma Rose knew she wasn't imagining things. The officer sent someone to check out the house, but when they arrived, there was no sign of anything unusual. The house was empty and quiet, and there was no evidence of anyone or anything being there. Grandma Rose was left feeling frustrated and scared. She knew what she had heard, and she knew what she had seen, but no one believed her. As the days went by, Grandma Rose tried to rebuild her life. She moved to a new house, tried to make new friends, and started going to therapy. But the scream stayed with her, echoing in her mind, a constant reminder of the terror she had faced. And then, one night, she heard it again, the scream, louder and closer than before. This time, it was right outside her new bedroom window. The scream went on, and Grandma Rose felt like she was going to lose her mind. She covered her ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The scream seemed to be coming from all around her, echoing off the walls. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the scream stopped. The silence was oppressive, and Grandma Rose felt like she was suffocating. She waited and waited, but there was no sound. As the night wore on, Grandma Rose's fear turned to despair. She knew she couldn't take much more of this. She was trapped in a living nightmare, and she didn't know how to escape. The next morning, Grandma Rose went to the police station again, determined to get some help. She told the officer what had happened, and this time, he listened. He took her seriously, and he promised to do something. The police set up surveillance equipment around Grandma Rose's house, trying to catch whatever was making the noise. They watched and waited, but there was nothing to see. As the days went by, Grandma Rose started to feel a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she would be able to get her life back on track. Maybe she would be able to escape the scream and the terror that came with it. But then, one night, the scream came again. This time, it was louder than ever before. Grandma Rose was sitting in her living room, watching TV, when suddenly the scream pierced the air. She jumped up, her heart racing, and ran to the window. She looked out into the darkness, but there was nothing to see. The scream went on, and Grandma Rose felt like she was going to lose her mind. She covered her ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The scream seemed to be coming from all around her, echoing off the walls. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the scream stopped. The silence was oppressive, and Grandma Rose felt like she was suffocating. She waited and waited, but there was no sound. As the night wore on, Grandma Rose's fear turned to despair. She knew she couldn't take much more of this. She was trapped in a living nightmare, and she didn't know how to escape. The next morning, Grandma Rose went to see a paranormal investigator. She had heard that he was good at dealing with supernatural phenomena, and she was desperate for help. The investigator listened to her story, his eyes narrowing as she spoke. When she finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "I think I know what's going on here," he said, "but I need to investigate further." Grandma Rose nodded, feeling a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this investigator could help her get to the bottom of things. The investigator set up equipment in Grandma Rose's house, trying to capture evidence of the supernatural activity. He spent hours setting up cameras and audio recorders, trying to catch something on tape. As the night wore on, Grandma Rose felt a sense of unease. She knew the scream would come again, and she didn't know how she would cope. And then, just as she was starting to drift off to sleep, the scream pierced the air. Grandma Rose jumped up, her heart racing, and ran to the investigator's equipment. The investigator was already there, monitoring the equipment. "I've got something," he said, his voice low and serious. "Let's take a look." Grandma Rose watched as the investigator reviewed the footage, and then, suddenly, a figure appeared on the screen. It was tall and imposing, and it seemed to be standing right behind Grandma Rose. The investigator turned to her, his eyes wide with surprise. "I think we've got our culprit," he said. Grandma Rose felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that she was in grave danger. And then, just as she was about to ask the investigator what they should do next, the figure on the screen spoke. "Find me," it said, its voice low and raspy. Grandma Rose felt a wave of fear wash over her. She knew that she had to get out of there, and fast. "Let's get out of here," she said to the investigator. "Now." The investigator nodded, and they quickly packed up their equipment. As they left the house, Grandma Rose felt a sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, she would be able to escape the scream and the terror that came with it. But as they walked away from the house, Grandma Rose heard the scream one last time. It was loud and piercing, and it seemed to be coming from right behind her. Grandma Rose didn't dare look back. She knew that she had to keep moving forward, no matter what. And then, just as they were about to turn the corner, the investigator stopped. "Wait," he said, his voice low and serious. "I think I see something." Grandma Rose turned to him, her heart racing. "What is it?" she asked. The investigator's eyes were fixed on something in the distance. "I think it's the source of the scream," he said. Grandma Rose followed his gaze, and what she saw made her blood run cold. And then everything went black. When Grandma Rose came to, she was lying in a hospital bed. The investigator was sitting next to her, his eyes filled with concern. "What happened?" Grandma Rose asked, her voice weak. "You fainted," the investigator replied. "But I think I know what we're dealing with here. It's not just a ghost or a supernatural entity. It's something much more sinister." Grandma Rose's eyes widened in fear. "What do you mean?" she asked. The investigator leaned in close. "I think it's a portal to another dimension," he said, "and I think the scream is coming from the other side." Grandma Rose's mind was reeling. She didn't know what to believe. But one thing was certain. She had to get to the bottom of this mystery, no matter what it took. The investigator nodded in agreement. "We'll work together to uncover the truth," he said. "But we have to be careful. We're dealing with forces beyond our understanding." Grandma Rose nodded, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. She knew that she wasn't for a wild ride, but she was determined to uncover the truth behind the scream. The investigator began to explain his theory about the portal to another dimension. "I've been studying the phenomenon for years," he said, "and I believe that the scream is a warning sign. It's a signal that the portal is opening, and something is trying to come through." Grandma Rose's eyes widened in shock. "What kind of thing?" she asked. The investigator hesitated, his eyes filled with a mix of fascination and fear. "I'm not entirely sure," he said, "but I think it's something ancient, something that has been trapped for centuries, and it's trying to break free." Grandma Rose felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't know what to believe, but she knew that she had to be careful. She didn't want to mess with forces beyond her understanding. The investigator nodded in agreement. "We'll proceed with caution," he said, "but we need to gather more evidence. We need to know what we're dealing with before we can stop it." Grandma Rose nodded, her mind racing with questions and fears. She knew that she wasn't for a long and terrifying journey, but she was determined to uncover the truth over the next few days. The investigator and Grandma Rose worked tirelessly to gather evidence. They set up cameras and audio recorders, trying to capture any sign of this supernatural activity. They researched the history of the house, trying to find any clues about the portal and the entity on the other side. And then, one night, they got their first break. The cameras captured a shadowy figure lurking in the background, and the audio recorders picked up a faint whispering in the darkness. The investigator and Grandma Rose were ecstatic. They finally had proof of the supernatural activity, and they were one step closer to uncovering the truth. But as they reviewed the footage, they realized that the entity was getting stronger. It was no longer just a whisper in the darkness. It was a presence that was palpable and menacing. Grandma Rose felt a sense of dread wash over her. She knew that they were running out of time. They had to stop the entity before it was too late. The investigator nodded in agreement. "We need to perform a ritual to close the portal," he said. "We need to banish the entity back to its own dimension." Grandma Rose's heart was racing with fear. She didn't know if she was ready for this, but she knew that she had to try. She nodded, and the investigator began to prepare for the ritual. As they stood in front of the portal, the investigator began to chant and recite ancient incantations. Grandma Rose felt a strange energy building up, a sense of power and anticipation. And then, suddenly, the portal began to glow. The entity on the other side began to stir, and Grandma Rose felt a sense of terror wash over her. The investigator continued to chant, his voice growing louder and more urgent. The portal began to pulse with energy, and the entity began to take shape. Grandma Rose felt like she was watching a horror movie, her heart racing with fear. She didn't know if they would succeed in closing the portal, or if the entity would break free and wreak havoc on their world. But then, just as the entity was about to emerge, the investigator shouted out a final incantation. The portal slammed shut, and the entity let out a deafening scream. Grandma Rose felt a sense of relief wash over her. They had done it. They had closed the portal and banished the entity back to its own dimension. But as they turned to leave, Grandma Rose heard a faint whisper in her ear. "It's not over yet," it said. Grandma Rose spun around, but there was no one there. The investigator looked at her with a concerned expression. "What is it?" he asked. Grandma Rose hesitated, unsure of what to say. "I don't know," she said finally, "but I think we're in for more than we bargained for." The investigator nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "We'll be ready," he said. "We'll face whatever comes next, together." And with that, they walked out of the house, ready to face whatever lay ahead. But as they walked away, Grandma Rose couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched, that the entity was still out there, waiting for its chance to strike ... And then, just as they were about to turn the corner, Grandma Rose heard the scream again. It was loud and piercing, and it seemed to be coming from all around her. Grandma Rose's heart sank, and she knew that she was in for a whole lot more.